Get on the ground, hands out.
A search warrant.
You're in the wrong house. Show me the warrant and the address right now.
Not playing games. Stay down while we clear the scene.
Look at the street sign, agent, because if this is Oak Court and your warrant says Oak Drive, you just turned a raid into a lawsuit.
Special Agent Kyle Riker had spent exactly 12 years building a reputation as the Drug Enforcement Administration's most aggressive door kicker, a reputation that would come crashing down in less than 45 minutes and cost the federal government $11.2 million. He was 34 years old, a man who walked with the heavy, deliberate stride of someone who believes the ground should be grateful for his footsteps. He wore his tactical vest like a suit of armor and treated the Fourth Amendment like a suggestion rather than a law. On this particular Tuesday morning at 10 a.m., Sharp Riker was standing on the manicured lawn of a sprawling estate in an upscale Atlanta suburb, convinced he was about to make the bust of the decade. He was wrong, dead wrong, and his mistake was about to be broadcast to the world. Before we get into the details of this catastrophic failure of justice, where are you tuning in from? If you believe that a badge shouldn't be a shield for incompetence, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We bring you the stories they don't want you to hear. The raid had been planned with what Riker considered military precision, though a more objective observer might have called it reckless haste. The target, according to a confidential informant whose reliability had been questioned by 2 other agencies, was a stash house for the cartel, a place where millions in dirty cash were washed before moving south. Riker didn't care about the doubts. He cared about the headlines. He cared about the win. He stood by the lead vehicle, an unmarked armored SUV, checking his MP5 submachine gun. The morning sun was bright, casting long, sharp shadows across the driveway. The birds were singing in the oak trees, oblivious to the violence about to be unleashed. The team consisted of 8 agents, all heavily armed, all wearing balaclavas, all keyed up on adrenaline and Riker's pre-raid speech about taking down bad guys. Riker looked at his watch. 10:02 a.m. "Let's move," he barked into his comms. He didn't wait for the local police liaison, who was running 5 minutes late. He didn't double-check the address against the GPS coordinates one last time. He just moved. That was Riker's style: move fast, break things, and let the lawyers clean up the mess later. He signaled the breach team. They moved in a stack formation up the driveway, boots crunching on the expensive gravel. The house was a majestic colonial revival brick and white columns with a heavy mahogany front door that looked like it had stood for a century. Riker saw it only as an obstacle. He nodded to the breacher, a hulking man named Miller, who carried a 50-pound battering ram. There was no knock. There was no federal agents open up, not yet. Riker liked the element of surprise. He liked the shock and awe. In his mind, he was a warrior in a war on drugs, and warriors didn't knock. He watched with a grim sense of satisfaction as Miller swung the ram back. The metal slammed into the wood with a sound like a thunderclap, splintering the frame and blasting the door open. "Federal agents, search warrant, get on the ground!" Riker screamed, rushing into the foyer with his weapon raised. He expected to find cartel soldiers, stacks of cash, maybe a weapon or 2. He expected resistance. He was ready for a fight. What he found instead would terrify a smart man, but Riker was too arrogant to be terrified. Not yet. He was about to learn that the most dangerous person you can encounter isn't a cartel boss with a gun, but a woman who knows the law better than you do. Elena Vance was sitting in her home office enjoying the rare quiet of a Tuesday morning without court appearances. At 56 years old, Elena was a formidable presence in the legal world. She was a former federal prosecutor who had spent 15 years putting dangerous men behind bars before switching sides to become a civil rights attorney. She had a reputation in the courtroom that was legendary. Judges respected her. Opposing counsel feared her. She was known for her intellect, her steel-trap memory, and an ability to dismantle a witness's testimony with a single well-placed question. She was currently reviewing a deposition for a class-action lawsuit against a pharmaceutical company, sipping a cup of Earl Grey tea. The house was her sanctuary. She had bought it 3 years ago, a reward for 3 decades of grinding high-stress work. It was located on Oak Court, a quiet cul-de-sac where the loudest noise was usually the landscaping crews on Thursdays. Helena was dressed for comfort but still professionally wearing a silk blouse and tailored slacks. Her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She was a black woman who had fought tooth and nail for every inch of respect she had earned in a system that often tried to overlook her. She didn't take safety for granted, but she felt safe here. That illusion of safety shattered instantly with the sound of the front door exploding inward. For a split second, Elena froze. Her mind, trained to analyze facts and evidence, couldn't process the noise. Was it a gas explosion? A car crashing into the house? Then came the shouting. "Federal agents, get down! Hands where I can see them!" The voices were guttural aggressive, filling the high ceilings of her foyer and echoing into her office. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but her training kicked in. Panic was useless. Panic got you killed. She stood up slowly from her desk, her hands raised, palms open. She walked out of the office and into the hallway where she was met by the blinding beam of a tactical light and the barrel of a submachine gun. "I am unarmed," she announced, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "I am the homeowner. I am unarmed." She saw figures in black faces covered swarming her entryway like locusts. Boots on her hardwood floors, mud tracking onto the Persian rug. "Get on the ground now!" a voice screamed. It was Riker. He was advancing on her weapon trained on her chest. Elena looked at him, trying to make eye contact, trying to find a human being behind the tactical gear. "Officer, I have a bad knee. I will get down, but I need to move slowly." "I said get down." Riker didn't wait. He closed the distance, grabbed her shoulder, and shoved her. Elena stumbled, catching herself on the wall before sliding to her knees. The indignity of it burned hotter than the pain in her joints. She was a grandmother. She was an officer of the court, and she was being handled like a violent felon in her own home. "Hands behind your back," Riker barked, grabbing her wrists and wrenching them behind her. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked tight, too tight. Elena winced, but didn't cry out. She took a deep breath, centering herself. She knew that whatever was happening, her best weapon was her mind, and she needed it sharp. "Agent," Elena said, her face pressed against the floorboards she had hand-selected for their warmth and grain. "I am Elena Vance. I am an attorney. You are currently executing a raid on my private residence. I am demanding to see your warrant immediately." Her voice was muffled by the floor, but the authority in it was unmistakable. Riker stood over her, breathing hard, the adrenaline still coursing through him. He looked around the foyer. No cartel guards, no stacks of cash. Just tasteful art family photos on the mantel and a woman in a silk blouse handcuffed on the floor. "Shut up," Riker snapped. "You'll see the warrant when we're done securing the scene. Until then, you're a suspect in an ongoing federal investigation." He motioned to his team. "Clear the house. Check the basement, check the attic. Look for the safe. Intel says the money is in a wall safe behind a painting." Riker was operating on autopilot, ignoring the gnawing feeling in his gut that something was off. The house didn't smell like a stash house. It smelled like lavender and old paper. But Riker was committed. To stop now would be to admit confusion, and Riker didn't do confusion. "Agent," Elena tried again, lifting her head as much as she could. "You are violating the Fourth Amendment. You are required to knock and announce unless you have a specific no-knock warrant signed by a judge. Did you knock?" Riker laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "We announced when we came through the door. It's called exigent circumstances, lady. Maybe if you spent less time lawyering and more time picking your friends, you wouldn't be in this mess." He leaned down, getting close to her face. "We know about the money. We know about the laundering. So save the 'I'm a lawyer' speech for your arraignment." Elena stared at him, memorizing his eyes, the only part of him visible. Blue, cold, arrogant. "I don't have friends who launder money," she said quietly. and exigent circumstances requires an immediate threat of evidence destruction or officer safety. I was sitting at a desk drinking tea. There was no threat. You have made a grave error." Riker straightened up, dismissing her. "Secure her," he told a junior agent Miller. "I'm going to check the office." "That is my law office," Elena shouted as Riker turned away. "Those files are privileged attorney-client communications. You cannot search them without a special master. If you touch those files, you are violating federal statute 18 U.S. Code 241 and 242. Riker paused at the doorway to the office. He looked back at her, shaking his head. "Lady, I don't care what codes you quote. Dirty money doesn't get attorney-client privilege." He walked into the office, leaving Elena with Miller. She looked up at the young agent guarding her. He looked nervous. He was shifting his weight, looking at the expensive crown molding, then down at the woman in cuffs. "What is your name, Agent?" Elena asked calmly. Miller hesitated. "Agent Miller, ma'am." "Agent Miller?" Elena said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "I suggest you don't touch anything, because your boss just walked into a minefield and you don't want to be standing next to him when it detonates." From her vantage point on the floor, Elena could hear the sounds of destruction. Drawers being yanked out and dumped, books being swept off shelves. The distinct sound of filing cabinets being pried open. It was the sound of her life's work being violated. Riker was in her office searching for a phantom safe, convinced that the legal files were just a cover for illicit ledgers. Every file he opened, every document he tossed aside was a separate violation. These were cases involving whistleblowers, victims of police brutality, families fighting for their civil rights. The confidentiality of those clients was sacred, protected by the highest laws of the land, and Riker was treating them like trash. "Nothing in the desk," Riker shouted from the other room. "Just a bunch of legal mumbo-jumbo. Keep looking." He came back out holding a stack of files. "Where's the money?" he demanded, standing over Elena. "Where's the safe?" Elena looked at the files in his hand, a case regarding a wrongful death suit against a sheriff's department in Alabama. "Put those down," she said. "You have just accessed privileged material. Every second you hold those, you are digging your grave deeper." Riker threw the files onto the entryway table, scattering papers across the floor. "Stop playing games. We know this is the stash house. We have the intel." He was sweating now. The house was too clean, too normal. There were no drugs. There were no weapons. Just high-end furniture and the smell of Earl Grey tea. He turned to his men who were coming down from the upstairs bedrooms. "Report. Clear upstairs, boss," one agent said, looking uncomfortable. It's just bedrooms. A guest room, a master suite, no safe, no cash, just clothes and shoes." "Basement," Riker barked. "Clear." Another voice came over the radio. "Just a wine cellar and a home gym, no stash." Riker's face reddened beneath his mask. "It's here, tear the place apart if you have to. Check the vents, check behind the baseboards." He was spiraling. He couldn't go back empty-handed. Not after the cost of this operation, not after the way he'd sold it to his superiors. He needed a win. He needed justification. He looked at Elena with pure disdain. "You're good," he sneered. "You hid it well, but we're going to find it." Elena watched him, her fear replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She had seen men like this before. Men who couldn't admit they were wrong. Men who doubled down on their mistakes rather than apologize. She knew exactly what was happening. "Agent," she said, "you are looking for a stash house. You are looking for a criminal enterprise. Look around you. Does this look like a cartel operation, or does it look like the home of a federal attorney?" "Federal attorney?" Riker scoffed. "Yeah, right. And I'm the Pope." "Check the wall," Elena said, nodding toward the hallway leading to the kitchen. The gallery wall. Third picture from the left. Riker hesitated, then walked over. He wanted to prove her wrong. He wanted to rip the picture down and find a wall safe behind it. He marched to the hallway and stopped. Riker stared at the wall. There was no safe. There was a framed photograph professionally taken. It showed Elena Vance standing at a podium, shaking hands with the Attorney General of the United States. She was holding a crystal plaque. Next to it was the plaque itself mounted on the wall. Department of Justice, Federal Prosecutor of the Year, Elena Vance. Below that were degrees from Harvard Law and Yale. Riker felt a cold drop of sweat roll down his spine. The silence in the hallway was deafening. Agent Miller, the young one who had been guarding Elena, had walked over to see what Riker was looking at. Miller's eyes went wide. He looked from the photo to the woman on the floor, then back to Riker. He pulled out his tablet, his hands shaking slightly. He tapped the screen, bringing up the digital warrant. "Boss," Miller whispered. "Boss, come look at this." "Not now," Riker snapped, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "Boss, you need to look at this now," Miller insisted, turning the tablet toward Riker. Riker looked. The warrant was for 1402 Oak Drive. He looked up. He looked at the front door he had just destroyed. He didn't need to go outside to know the truth, but he walked to the shattered entrance anyway and looked at the brass numbers next to the porch light. 1402. He looked at the street sign visible at the end of the driveway. Oak Court. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Oak Drive was 3 streets over. It was a rental property, a known trouble spot. This was Oak Court. A wealthy, quiet cul-de-sac. He had raided the wrong house. He had raided the wrong house of a former federal prosecutor. He had raided the wrong house of a former federal prosecutor who specialized in civil rights litigation. Riker stood in the doorway, the tablet in his hand, feeling like a lead weight. The realization washed over him like a tidal wave of nausea. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a career-ending, pension-destroying, lawsuit-generating catastrophe. He walked back into the foyer. The other agents had stopped searching. They had sensed the shift in the atmosphere. They were standing around, weapons lowered, looking at Riker for direction. Riker looked at Elena Vance, still handcuffed on the floor, looking up at him with an expression of utter triumph. "Oak Drive," she said softly. "You're looking for Oak Drive, aren't you?" Riker didn't answer. "The drug dealers rent the house on Oak Drive," she continued, her voice cutting through the silence. "I know. I filed a nuisance complaint with the HOA about them 3 months ago. You are on Oak Court." Riker swallowed hard. "Uncuff her," he muttered. "What?" Miller asked. "I said uncuff her." Riker yelled, his voice cracking. Miller scrambled to unlock the handcuffs. Elena pulled her arms forward, rubbing her wrists where the metal had dug in. She stood up slowly, brushing the dust from her silk slacks. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She simply stood there in her own foyer and transformed from a victim into a prosecutor. "Agent," Elena said, extending her hand. "I'll take that warrant now." Riker held the tablet against his chest. "Ma'am, there's been a mistake. We were given bad intel." "The warrant," Elena interrupted, "and your badge number, and the name of your supervisor, and the contact information for your agency's general counsel." "Look, we can work this out," Riker said, taking a step back. "We'll pay for the door. It was an honest mistake. The GPS—" "The GPS?" Elena laughed, a dry, incredulous sound. "You want to blame a satellite for your inability to read a street sign? You want to blame technology for your failure to verify the target before executing a paramilitary raid?" She stepped closer to him. She was 5 inches shorter than Riker, but in that moment she towered over him. "You violated 18 U.S. Code Section 2235, search warrant procured maliciously. You violated the Fourth Amendment. You committed assault and battery. You committed false imprisonment, and you destroyed privileged legal files." She pointed to the shattered door. "Do you know what qualified immunity is, Agent?" Riker nodded stiffly. Good. Then you know it protects government officials from liability for civil damages, insofar as their conduct does not violate clearly established statutory or constitutional rights. Well, guess what? Raiding the wrong house without verifying the address is a textbook violation of a clearly established right. You just lost your SHIELD agent. You are personally liable. Riker looked at his men. Let's go. Pack it up. Oh, you're not leaving yet, Elena said. Not until I have every name. Not until I have photos of the damage. Miller. She turned to the junior agent. Get your camera. Document this scene. If you leave without documenting it, I will add destruction of evidence to the lawsuit. Miller looked at Riker. Riker nodded defeatedly. Do it. Elena stood there supervising the agents as they sheepishly photographed the broken door, the overturned drawers, the scattered files. She made them document every inch of the chaos they had created. She was calm, cold, and absolutely terrifying. She was building her case right there in her foyer while the defendants were still in the room. Riker tried to stand in the corner invisible, but his presence was a festering wound in the room. He knew with sinking certainty that his life as he knew it was over. 10 minutes later, the walk of shame began. Riker and his team exited the house, but the world outside had changed. The noise of the battering ram had alerted the neighbors. In a neighborhood like Oak Court, people didn't just ignore loud noises. They called the police and they came out to watch. A crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. And because this was the 21st century, phones were out, recording. But it wasn't just neighbors. A local news van, which had been in the area covering a charity event, had caught wind of the police activity and diverted. The reporter was standing at the end of the driveway, microphone in hand, cameraman rolling. Elena walked out onto her porch. She didn't hide. She stood next to the broken door frame, arms crossed. Get a shot of them leaving, she called out to the reporter, her voice carrying over the lawn. Get their faces. Riker tried to duck his head, shielding his face with his hand, but it was too late. The cameras caught the DEA emblazoned on his vest. They caught the heavy weaponry. They caught the look of defeat in his posture. This is Agent Kyle Riker, Elena announced to her neighbors, acting as the town crier of his incompetence. He just raided the wrong house. He destroyed my door, handcuffed me, and searched my privileged files because he couldn't read a street sign. A gasp went through the crowd. A neighbor, Mr. Henderson, shouted, Elena, are you okay? I'm fine, Bob, she shouted back. But the taxpayers won't be. Riker hurried to the armored SUV. Go, 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 he hissed to the driver. The team piled in, looking like clowns pouring into a circus car. The engine roared to life and the vehicle peeled out of the driveway, kicking up gravel. Elena watched them go. She didn't smile. This wasn't funny. It was tragic. If she hadn't been who she was, if she had been a young mother, a confused elderly person, someone without legal training, how would this have ended? Would they have planted evidence to cover their mistake? Would someone have been shot? She looked at the cameraman who was zooming in on her. Do you want a statement? She asked. The reporter ran up the driveway. Yes, ma'am. Can you tell us what happened? Elena looked directly into the lens. Today you saw what happens when power is unchecked by intelligence. Today the federal government entered my home without a valid warrant. They will pay for the door. But they will also pay for the arrogance that allowed them to think they could do this to a citizen of the United States. The lawsuit was filed 48 hours later. Vance versus Riker et al. It was a masterpiece of legal drafting. Elena didn't hire an attorney. She represented herself with a team of her former colleagues clamoring to assist pro bono. The complaint detailed every violation, every second of false imprisonment, every breach of protocol. The video footage from the neighbors and the news crew played on loop on national television. The photos of the shattered mahogany door became a symbol of government overreach. The Department of Justice tried to settle quickly. They offered $2 million. Elena rejected it without a second thought. "This isn't about the money," she told the press. "It's about the precedent." During discovery, Elena demanded Riker's personnel file. The government fought to keep it sealed, citing national security. The judge, a man who had known Elena for 20 years, ordered it released. The file was a smoking gun. Riker had 5 previous complaints of excessive force, 2 other botched raids where addresses were confused, though those had been on rental properties in low-income neighborhoods where the victims hadn't had the resources to sue. He had been reprimanded but never suspended. He was a ticking time bomb that the agency had refused to defuse. The trial never happened. The evidence was so overwhelming, the public outcry so deafening that the government capitulated. They agreed to a settlement of $11.2 million, one of the largest payouts for a wrongful raid in history. But Elena didn't stop at the money. As part of the settlement, she demanded a public apology from the head of the DEA and the immediate termination of Kyle Riker. Riker was fired on a Friday afternoon. His immunity was stripped, leaving him open to personal liability lawsuits from his previous victims, whom Elena was now helping to locate. At 34, his career in law enforcement was obliterated. He would never carry a badge again. Elena stood on her repaired porch 6 months later. The door was new, stronger, reinforced with steel. The money had been deposited, but she had already donated half of it to a legal defense fund for victims of police misconduct. It was quiet on Oak Court. The birds were singing, the sun was shining, but as Elena sipped her tea, she knew the peace was different now. It wasn't the innocent peace of safety, it was the vigilant peace of a survivor. She had won. She had crushed the man who tried to crush her. But she knew that for every Elena Vance there were 1,000 others who didn't have the law degree, the connections, or the voice to fight back. And that is where the real tragedy lies. We celebrate the victory of the one who wins, but we must not forget the silence of the many who lose. What do you think? Should agents be personally, financially liable for their mistakes, or should the taxpayer foot the bill? Should there be a mandatory 3 strikes rule for law enforcement errors? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. These conversations are uncomfortable, but they are necessary. If you found this story eye-opening, please like and share. We have to keep the lights on so the truth doesn't stay in the dark. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.